Hi, Kalyan, how are you? Muted.
হ্যালো।
You are still muted.
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ করছি তো, সবাইকে অ্যাড করছি। হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ ঢুকেছি ঢুকেছি, হ্যাঁ ঢুকেছি ঢুকেছি।
হ্যাঁ, এবার হয়েছে আনমিউট।
এবার হয়েছে, রাইট।
কি খবর?
ভালো ভালো, তুমি কেমন আছো?
হ্যাঁ, ভালো আছি।
আচ্ছা,
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Once again, welcome back to the 7-day web workshop being organized by Department of English, Shantipur College. It has taken a truly national character in terms of its participation, because as I've always told that more than 1,500 participants have been participating in different platforms, either it may be Google Meet or YouTube, various platforms being utilized to reach out to them, and it has been a magnificent journey so far. And as it was started on 25th of August, and it was none other than the Honorable VC of Kalyan University, Professor Kumar Ghosh, who himself set the wheel rolling, and it's rolling and rolling and rolling, producing outstanding intellectual results. And today is the 5th day. It is another very important day because we have got a very special resource person. I do feel the honor and delight to introduce him, though he doesn't need to be introduced because he is quite well-known academician in our state, even in the national level as well. So he is Professor Kalyan Kumar Das. I have the absolute pleasure to tell a few words about him, but these words would be absolutely unqualified to make a particular picture of this phenomenon personality. Professor Kalyan Kumar Das is currently Assistant Professor at the Department of English, Presidency University. Professor Das has been a UGC visiting fellow at the Center for Dalit Studies, Department of English, Delhi University. And then he's also visiting guest faculty at the Department of Comparative Indian Language and Literature, University of Calcutta. And he is truly, I would say, a legend or a stalwart in making. He has already achieved such phenomenal, achievements, academic achievements, that it's almost impossible to make a true picture of his, achievements in academic field. Still, in my unqualified effort, I'm trying to make a small, brief depiction of this would-be stalwart. Ongoing research is exploring literary texts produced by journalists in Bengal to understand how this politics of identity formation, identification gets mediated through these cultural and literary productions. History and research interest revolved around critical theory with a special focus on structuralism, Marxism, post-structuralism, continental philosophy, Indian philosophical systems, political philosophies of Antonio Gramsci, Luis Althusser, and of course, B.R. Ambedkar. And then commonwealth and post-colonial literatures, diaspora studies, nationalism, caste, race, and of course, Dalit literature. And he's a different kind of personality because, he has never been, afraid, he has always been fearless, bold to air his opinion in different platforms, as I have been noticing, and he never thinks that how his reaction will be taken by the people. He always, whatever strikes his conscience, his intellectual ideas, he expresses that without any drop of fear. So, and another point is that he is not, I would say, so-called prolific writer. He doesn't love to write too much. He has expressed somewhere I read, that I don't love to read, countless articles, essays being published in different, journals or like that, he is very choosy, selective. He has, somewhere expressed his desire that I may end up my entire career writing only a few books, not a large number of books, And he has always warned his students also that don't be trapped in the temptation of the politics of publication. That I have published this number of articles, papers. Try to be true to the actual work. The work must be of true merit. It must have some actual academic values. Only for the sake of publication doesn't make any sense to at least Professor Kalyan Kumar Das. But still, he has a number of articles, very valuable articles published in some of the most renowned journals in the world, like Critical Philosophy of Race, Dewey Studies, Economic and Political Weekly, and etc., etc. He regularly contributes to these journals all over the world. And his research article on historiography, published in the EPW, is taught at the master's program in history at the University of Warwick, UK. It's a phenomenal achievement, Now, in his doctoral dissertation, he seeks to interrogate the earlier anti-caste movements in undivided Bengal in order to identify and understand new structures of knowledge production by Dalits in 20th century and first 2 decades of 21st century, and the resultant changes in identity formation and traditionally lower caste groups. I remember that there was a group set up by the Higher Education Department in West Bengal to revive the lost glory of President University. It was way back, probably 2011 or 12, and they decided to rope in some exceptionally qualified, versatile talents to lead the way. And there was an interview that was taken. A large number of people were interviewed, whether physical interview or through Skype. And among them, of course, Professor Kalyan Kumar Das was there. He was there. And next day, he was shocked to learn he received a phone call from one of his friends who told him that, have you read the newspaper today? If I'm not mistaken, it was Anand Patrika. He told, no, I haven't read yet. Then this friend, let him know that your name, is found to be there. You have been selected as a professor, and there's mentor group, if I'm not mistaken, led by none other than Professor Sugato Bosu. He was there. So, and very, select, what should I say? Candidates had been selected for this university to revive the lost glory of President University. And I'm so proud to say he was among those few select candidates, Since then, he has been performing in different capacities in President University. And another very, an interesting thing that I love to share with you all, that as far as Shantipur College is concerned, Department of English is concerned, he has been reviewer. He has also been reviewer of a number of prestigious institutions.
Expect that extremely informed and yet so overwhelming an introduction. Let me begin with a couple of disclaimers. This is going to be a lecture primarily meant for the students, the undergraduate students, and if you like, some postgraduate students as well. This is a text that I have been teaching at Presidency for the last 4 or 5 years. I have been discussing this with the postgraduate students, master's second year students. So this is primarily shaped, planned as a classroom lecture. So if there is any expectation on the part of my audience to look for innovative research ideas in this lecture, I must let them know at the outset that they might be a little disappointed with what I'm going to deliver. Now, with that caveat, let me also inform you that this is going to be a reading, an attempt to read the text in a cursory way. It's not going to be a very exhaustive reading. It goes without saying, because it's difficult for me to go for an exhaustive reading within a span of 1 hour of a complicated text like this one. So that's the second caveat. Now, with these two caveats, that it's going to be primarily meant for UG or PG students and not for the research fellows, or for that matter, for my colleagues from different universities, although they are very welcome, and I'm already happy to see Paramita Di there, along with some other colleagues from different colleges and universities from West Bengal and beyond. So I'm very happy to welcome them and excited to have them over here. But this is, as I said, primarily meant for the students. And secondly, it's not going to be an exhaustive lecture. It's going to be a cursory reading, although I will try to be as sincere as possible, as committed to that cursory reading as possible. Now, the second caveat with which I am trying to begin is also meant for letting all of you know that this particular story is usually read by a lot of students, and I'm afraid by a lot of college professors, as simply, and I say this with a little bit of risk, as simply a story of a tribal girl being raped. Now, that's not a simple phenomenon at all. What I'm trying to suggest is that it is primarily read, and again I'm using a problematic word deliberately, and I'll explain these words later on, a romanticized way. They read the text in a romanticized way. Now, what do I really mean by that? People generally read this as a sad story of a tribal girl, Draupadi Maiden, who gets raped by police personnel, by the representatives of law in that sense. That is usually how it is read. And I'm calling it a romanticized reading because if you read it in this way, if you read it simply in terms of how state machinery oppresses certain constituencies or their protests, their acts of resistance, or if you simply read it in terms of a girl who gets repeatedly raped, brutally raped, then you miss out on a lot of important aspects of the story. This is romanticized reading, primarily in the sense that there is a great deal of hoo-ha on the part of these urban, middle-class, English-educated people like us, like most members in this audience, like me. We have a particular class nature. This is not an undifferentiated class nature. It is certainly marked by gender relations, class, caste, etc. But by and large, we share similar cultural locations, similar class locations. And from that location, when we start reading this story, the usual tendency is to read it simply in terms of this violence or in terms of this terrible sadness, if we can use that kind of a phrase, that we encounter in the story. And that does not really help in, giving the story a close reading. Now, it is, as I had already said, this is important to keep this in your mind. It is impossible for me to go for an exhaustive, detailed reading, a close textual reading within a span of 1 hour. So what I will do instead is to extrapolate a few aspects of the story, some portions from the story that are otherwise completely overlooked. Because the focus is on how a tribal girl is brutally, repeatedly raped by Shenanayak and his team. because there is so much focus on the body of the raped woman, the body of Draupadi Mehin, because there is so much focus on portraying Shenanayak as a simple negative character about whom we can only be dismissive. Because we have been reading the story in that way, to borrow this phrase from Frederick Jameson, that is the interpretive load of the text. So when I'm saying I'm against the romanticized reading of the text, I'm basically talking about this interpretive load. Interpretive load is something wherein you have an already circulated idea, an interpretive idea of a particular literary text. And when you encounter the text, you are somehow or the other guided by that interpretive load. So our attempt, on the contrary, is to not allow ourselves to be entirely engulfed by that sort of an interpretive load. And instead try to focus on, this is why I said that it is important for us to focus on certain aspects of the story that are otherwise not so exhaustively discussed, that are otherwise not so elaborately talked about. There are 2-3 such aspects that I will be discussing in today's talk. Let me begin with the name. This is a story about Draupadi Mehin, but that is not the exact name that is given to her. She is a young 27-year-old tribal Santal lady who has been associated with anti-state activities, Naxalite movements, you can call it Maoist insurgency, whatever you want to call it, because there is a great deal of overlapping there between the Maoist insurgency and the Naxalite political activities of the non-electoral left. And she has been associated with these movements. These are movements primarily against the local landlords, the sahukars, moneylenders, the local landowning class. And as Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak's translation, the preface to that translation informs us, there is always a nexus between the local bureaucracy, the government's representatives, at the block level, at the panchayat level. There is always a nexus between the government's representatives at that level, at the grassroots level, and these moneylenders and sahukars and landed people who oppress these tribal people, lower caste people as well. Although this particular lady, Draupadi Mehin, as a representative of the Santal tribe, one of the important tribal constituencies of this part of India, should not be confused with a Dalit woman. Many of my students, because the term Dalit is so much in parlance right now, they often, in the answer scripts that I have evaluated over the years, I have often come across this kind of descriptions. Draupadi Mehin, a Dalit woman. Please don't describe Draupadi Mehin as a Dalit woman, because the Dalit woman, although if you go for the 1972 definition of the term Dalit, Marathi Dalit Panther Manifesto definition of the term Dalit, then you might probably ascribe that term to somebody like Draupadi Mehin, but it is problematic in the sense that Dalit is primarily a term that designates the untouchable castes, the lower castes, and so on. There is a great deal of difference between the lower caste constituencies and the tribal constituencies. So just to clarify that, we need to be careful about the terms that we use to talk about while talking about somebody like Draupadi or Draupadi Mehin. Now, the story, as I said, this is about Draupadi Mehin, about her struggle. Her husband has been killed. She is trying to escape from the police personnel, the army men, and so on. And she is eventually caught by them. And then the leader of the army men there, Shenanayak, the leader of the police personnel, he orders his men to brutally rape her. And the phrase is in the story, make her do the needful. That is the utterance of Shenanaya. And she is brutally raped again and again and again. And at the end of the story, something of tremendous interest for the readers happens. We encounter an ending of this story that we did not, as readers, as middle class, mostly urban, English educated people, that we otherwise had not expected from this kind of a story. That is why I said that this is also a story that refuses to be romanticized. It certainly depicts a very disturbing narrative of a tribal girl who is involved with anti-state activities, who is involved with those Naxalite, Maoist, insurgent activities that try to destroy, that try to annihilate the dominance of local landlords, the nexus between the local governmental representatives and the local landlords and money lending people. It is a resistance against the exploitation of their free labor. Bigar khata is the term that we are familiar with. This unpaid labor is exploited by these people, and she is involved with those activities that try to put an end to those exploitative activities. That is what she is doing. So it is a sad tale. There isn't any doubt about it. But we need to remember that the end of the story does not allow us to simply read it as a sad tale, a terrible tale, or a disturbing tale, wherein a tribal girl is raped because of what she has been involved with, because of the political activities that she has been involved with. That is not what it is. So we'll come back to that last part of the story. So that constitutes one part of my lecture today. The last part of the story. What do we come across in the last part of the story, the last couple of lines of the story? That is what we will focus on eventually. But I will begin with the politics of naming, the politics of title that we come across in this story. The name of the story is Draupadi. And we are told, in course of this narrative, we are told that she has been given this particular name, Draupadi, a Sanskrit name. You might even call, to borrow that, almost everyday common parlance term, the term in our common parlance now, at least in academic circles, Brahminical name, right? So she is given this sort of Sanskrit Brahminical name, something that does not suit her identity at all. There is an incongruity between her identity as a tribal Santal girl and the name that she has been ascribed to. There is this Friday-like status that she occupies there. That is why I said that the politics of naming is extremely important in this story. So she is given this Sanskrit name by Surya Shahu's wife. Who is Surya Shahu? Surya Shahu is the local landlord, the money lending class person whose wife, in a moment of benevolence, ascribes this name to Draupadi. And then probably the name gets distorted in her tribal Santali pronunciation, and it becomes, from Draupadi, it becomes Draupadi. And this transition from Draupadi to Draupadi is something that should interest us. This is my first point of intervention, if you like. So this focus on the politics of naming is also not simply about, about naming. It's also about the uncanny textual similarity as well as dissimilarity between this text written by Mahashweta Devi and the Indian epic text of the Mahabharata and its very important character, Draupadi. Right? So there is a great deal of similarity as well as dissimilarity between the two characters, Draupadi in Mahabharata and Draupadi Mehen in Mahashweta's story, Draupadi. Right? And if you look at the critical inquiry translation done by Gayatri Spivak, translation of this story by Gayatri Spivak. If you look at the preface, the prefatory note that Spivak writes, she says that Draupadi Mehen is both the palimpsest of Mahabharata's Draupadi, a continuity of Mahabharata's Draupadi, both in terms of how she responds, partly, not entirely, to the situation of rape, and the very fact that there is this sort of dishonorable act that is meted out to Draupadi Mehen, as it was done to Mahabharata's Draupadi. Draupadi's Vastraharan is the reference point here. So there is a great deal of similarity between their situations, their predicaments, and yet there is a great deal of dissimilarity. There is a great deal of difference in terms of how they respond to these situations of two somewhat similar dishonorable acts that are being meted out to them as women. Right? So that is why Gayatri Spivak says that the Draupadi Mehen is both a palimpsest in the sense that it is a continuity of Mahabharata's narrative, and at the same time it is a departure from that. There is a contradiction between Draupadi Mehen and Draupadi. We'll come to that. But again, on a counterintuitive vein, when we talk about politics of naming, we should not be entirely focusing on Draupadi or Draupadi Mehen. We should also talk about another important character in this story, and his name is Shenanayak. Look at the term Shenanayak. Shenanayak is not a proper noun. It's not a particular name like Kalyan or like Anirban. It's not a particular name. It's a general template, a designatory template, because he is the leader of his team of army police personnel. So he is the leader. He is the Senapati or Senanayak, if you like, right? So it describes his profession. It describes his role as the chief of the representatives of the state who have been deployed to put an end to such exploitative acts, right? Now, these are the two important names that we recognize in this story, and the politics of naming in relation to these two names will occupy an important space in our discussions today. The second aspect that I will try to focus on is, as I said, I will try to focus on things that are not very important in the usual romanticized reading of this kind of a tale. The other important aspect of the story, which we often overlook, and I'm going to link this second point with our discussions on Shenanayak. The second aspect is, and a completely neglected part of the story, this is not something that comes to the foreground when we read the story, but this is an important aspect of the story in my reading as well as it is in the reading of Gayatri Spivak. And this is a reference to the song that Draupadi sings. It is a song about some beans, the color of beans. But the songs are too intimidating for Shenanayak and his team. They are completely clueless as to what this song implies. They are afraid that this is some kind of a codified message for their revolutionary activities, and they are completely horrified by the possible interpretations of that text, of that song. And they invite experts, scholars on Santali language, to decipher, to decode the meaning that might get implied through that song. Right? Now, this is very important. This song is very important. Let me focus on two related terms. It is a translation project, which is why this Santali language song has to be translated in either Bangla or Hindi by the experts who have been invited to read the text, to decipher, to interpret the song, because they're afraid that it might have something dangerous for them. So it is a project of translation. But like most projects of translation, it's also an act of interpretation.
Sorry to interrupt, Professor Das, and you are not audible. Is there anything wrong with your microphone? We're not getting you properly. Neither your picture nor your the voice we can get. Something must have gone wrong. Professor Das, somehow or other we're missing you, If you can kindly readjust the settlement, there might be some technical glitch, but we're not getting you. I hope you are getting me. And doing the needful, because you are completely, I'm not getting anything from you. Neither your voice nor your figure visible. Something must have gone wrong. I hope you're addressing the issue. I request the viewers to have some patience, because I'm sure he's trying to fix it. There must be some problem. We had better wait a bit for him. I hope shortly he's coming back. Nearly 150 participants are today with us. It's been a glorious journey today, right from the beginning.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes. Yes, you are audible.
Sorry for the
and visible
interruption.
as well.
Sorry for the interruption.
No, it happens, I don't want to be sorry. Please go on, sir.
Yeah, so I was talking about the interpretive project, and I'm extremely apologetic about this interruption. I had to take this urgent call. But anyway, the second part is then focused on this apparently dangerous and apparently incomprehensible song that we come across in this story. And as I said, the experts from Calcutta are invited, are asked to go there and to decipher the meaning of this particular song. So this interpretive translation project is something that we need to briefly focus on. And as I said, this part of my discussion today is linked to the second part of what I mentioned in the first section. That is to say, this focus on Shilonite's name. Now, and then the third part is the last part of the story. I'll begin with the last part of the story, because that is something that will take us back to the first two issues that I have focused on. So what is the first issue? Just to sum it up, first point that I made is about politics of naming, where we need to focus on Draupadi / Draupadi Mehi. The second part of that first section is a focus on Shenanayak's name. Shenanayak's name is not a proper name. As I said, it's a designatory name. It's a professional term. And we are not given any proper name for Shenanayak. And then the second aspect that, as I said, I'll focus on is the interpretive translation project. And then the third part, which is a focus on the last part of the text, last couple of lines of the text. Now, what do we come across in the last part of the text? In the last part of the text, the rape has already happened. Brutally, Draupadi has been brutally raped again and again and again. And after that brutal rape, repeated brutal rape, Draupadi Mehan is lying there on the earth, and she is naked. There is blood clot in her vagina. Her breasts are mangled, and Shenanayak orders his men to give her some clothes so that she can clothe herself. After the rape, the men who raped her are asked to provide her with some clothes. Now, this is something that immediately reminds us of the situation, of a similar situation that was averted by Krishna's intervention in the Mahabharata during the Vastraharan episode. Draupadi in Mahabharata was being disrobed, was about to get completely disrobed, but she was not completely disrobed by Dushashan because Krishna continuously provided her with clothes, with a piece of cloth, with which she could hide her body, right? In this case, we come across a completely opposite picture. Here, after being raped, Draupadi Mehan refuses to be clothed by these men. She refuses to be clothed by these men. She says, I will not get clothed. I will not put on any clothing. There is no need to do that. There isn't any man around. I don't consider these people as men. And there is no shame in being naked, in staying naked in this way, with my mangled breasts, with blood clot in my vagina. There isn't any necessity for me to put on a garment, to put on a cloth. Right. But this is not the most surprising part of this last section of the story. What is most surprising is the response that we receive from Shenanayak. Shenanayak is this extremely confident man. We are told at the outset, in the first part of the story, we are told by the narrator that Shenanayak is somebody who empathizes, who has sympathies for his enemies, referring to these tribal people who have been trying to act against the oppressive clutches of local landlords and government representatives and so on. So we are told that Shenanayak, in theory, has sympathy for these people, but in practice, he has to annihilate them. He has to destroy them. He has to finish them off. And that is why, as if he has to ask his men to rape Draupadi Mehan so that her confidence is broken, shattered, and she is destroyed. Not just a physical destruction, but a moral destruction. Her moral stamina has to be destroyed, and the easiest way, according to Shenanayak, the easiest way to do that is to get her raped by his men. That is what he does. That is what he asks his men to do, and they abide by what he says, and Draupadi Mehan is repeatedly raped, as I said. But what is this focus on theory and practice of Shenanayak? Why is it so important for Shenanayak to have some sympathies for his enemy in theory, in terms of scholarly, bookish knowledge perhaps? It is important for him to know his enemy, and we are told by the narrator of the story that it is important to defeat his enemy. It is important for him, for Senanayak and his team, to understand his enemy, their enemy, the class of people to which Draupadi Mehin belongs. And we must also think of another category of people who are involved in the story, but they are pushed in the background of the story. And that is another reason why we don't pay much attention to these people who are described by Spivak as gentlemen revolutionaries. And there is a counterpoint here that we discern in the gentleman revolutionaries' relationship with theory and practice, their class affiliation. These are mostly, students who have received English education, university education, and urban middle-class people, the class to which Senanayak also belongs. So look at the difference between these two types of people. On one hand, you have somebody like Senanayak, who belongs to the urban, educated middle-class section of the Bengali society. And in theory, he has sympathies for his enemy. He considers it important for him and for his teammates to have a proper understanding, to have a proper knowledge of the tribal people, their languages, their song, right? That is why I tried to focus on the song. It is important for them to know their languages, their cultures, to understand them. And in order to do this, at the level of theory, at the level of bookish knowledge, let us say, he has to have some sympathy for these people. In fact, he, somewhat like that district commissioner in Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, he talks about a book project wherein he will talk mostly about the tribal revolutionaries and less about people like him. Right? So he has a book project. These are the intellectual projects that are his priorities. This interpretive project, translation project, this project of writing a book on this community, this tendency to have a theoretical sympathy for these people, these are the attributes that determine Senanayak's character. This is again an occasion for me to remind my audience that it will be stupid for us to simply focus on the story as wherein Senanayak is the typical villain and Draupadi is simply a subject of pity and sympathy on our part. That is what I said by using that term, romanticized reading of this text, that phrase. So if Senanayak belongs to this urban, educated, middle-class constituency. That is the class affiliation of Senanayak. Gentlemen revolutionaries, people who have been associated with Naxalite insurgent activities, Maoist activities, let us say, people who are educated in institutions like Presidency and Jadavpur and so on, urban colleges, let us say at that time, other institutions affiliated to other colleges affiliated to the University of Calcutta. These are the people who then go to Jungle Mahal, apparently, and then try to engage themselves in these radical anti-state activities. This is a constituency that has similar class affiliation as that of Senanayak. And yet there is a striking difference between these two types of people. Senanayak is somebody who believes in keeping the difference between theory and practice alive. This is important. Senanayak is somebody who believes in keeping theoretical sympathy for tribals or such people who are involved in these anti-state activities for whatever reasons of social inequality and exploitation, discrimination. He has sympathies for them, but in practice, it is his job, it is his official duty to destroy these people. Right? On the contrary, the gentlemen revolutionaries, people who are Draupadi Mehin's comrade, these are the people who, despite having a similar class affiliation as that of Senanayak, actually refuse to maintain that gap between theory and practice. These are people who try to bridge the gap between theory and practice, between what they have learned in their books, what they have studied, and what they do If they have read their Harvard Marcuse, if they have read their Japal Satre, they are ready to deploy them in their lived political realities, in their anti-state activities, at every place where there is a question of social injustice, social inequality, and so on. So unlike Shenanayak, this is a group of people that tries to bridge the gap between theory and practice. Why do I have to talk about this gap between theory and practice? Because the text itself tells us this. It is usually the practice on the part of readers and teachers as well, people like us, to avoid this reference to theory and practice as we come across it in the story, right? We simply bypass it. There is this reference to, Shenanayak holding an anti-fascist book, having sympathies for the people he is supposed to destroy, and yet he will destroy because that is his official duty, right? That is the law that he has to abide by. And Shenanayak is not a simple villain in that sense. A simple villain would have been somebody who actually believes in the badness of these people, that these people are incarnations of evil. Tribal people are incarnations of evil. That is how he would have perceived them if he had been just a normative villain, a negative character. But he is not. We are constantly told, deliberately so, on the part of the narrator, we are being constantly told that here is a man who is ready to understand the cultural traditions, language of Santals and other similar tribal groups who are probably involved in some cases in some anti-state insurgent activities. It is important for him to understand their song, for instance, right? That is the interpretive project with which he is associated. That is the translation project with which he is associated. And at the same time, he is the man who will destroy these people, who is supposed to destroy these people, who has been deployed there to carry out this operation against these insurgent activities, these people who are carrying out these insurgent activities. And Draupadi Mehen is a representative of that people, of that group of people. And he is the one who asks his men to rape Draupadi Mehen, to destroy his moral stamina. And this is the way he maintains this very important gap, incongruity between theory and practice. Now, this leads me to the next crucial phase in the preface that Gayatri Spivak wrote to the translation of this story. The crucial term there is negative capability. It's a Keatsian term. John Keats used the term negative capability. Shenanayak's character is a character that maintains a negative capability vis-a-vis his job. Negative capability is a kind of capability of writers, artists, according to Keats's definition, wherein they are in some state of intellectual confusion, and yet that leads them to achieve some sort of an artistic perfection. It is a capability, right? But because there is a confusion, because there is some kind of incongruity between two held perceptions, it is negative in that sense. I'm putting it in a very rough sense, and this is not a class on romantic theory, so I'll not expand on this. But this particular phrase is important, right? So, what we come across in Shenanayak's is this negative capability, this tendency to bridge, not to bridge the gap between theory and practice. On the contrary, in Gentleman Evolutionists, there is this attempt to bridge the gap between theory and practice. Now, let us again quickly focus on the last part of the story. As I have already said once, that there are some striking things that happen at the last part of the story, in the last part of the story. We would have expected that by the time Draupadi Mehin gets raped, her confidence would have been completely shattered, but that doesn't happen. Her confidence is not shattered. She is still a very confident lady. And in that state, with her mangled breast, blood clot in her vagina, she stands up naked, refuses to be clothed by Shenanayak's men, unlike Draupadi in Mahabharata. And as I said, the more interesting part of this last part of the story is Shenanayak's response. I have so far narrated that Shenanayak has this unique capability called negative capability, and Spivak plays with Keats's term there in order to tell us how this maintenance of the gap between theory and practice is absolutely crucial for Shenanayak to do what he's supposed to do. It's not simply his task to go and destroy these people. It's also his project to understand these people better so that he can annihilate them better. But there is, in theory, he has sympathy. In practice, doesn't. And that negative capability, and even if you look at the Keatsian term negative capability, there is a question of sovereign subject there. What is the question of sovereign subject? The artist in question, despite the moral confusion, despite these moral contradictions that are going on in his head, is uniquely capable of producing a piece of art. And that is his capability, right? So there is some kind of sovereign subject there, a subject that is in full control of what he is doing. If you look at Keats's definition, this is a very important aspect of negative capability. That the subject in question, the author subject in question, the painter, the artist, the writer, the poet, is in full control of what he is doing. And Keats's example is Shakespeare. It's somewhat very interesting to see that there are references to Prospero, Tempest, Shakespeare's Tempest, Prospero, in this particular story. And Mahashweta draws a parallelism between Shakespeare's Prospero and Shenanayak's character. This is why I was spending so much time on talking about Shenanayak's theory and practice. Somebody said that it is becoming somewhat repetitive, but this repetition is very important. It needs to get into the head of whoever is of the story, where he encounters this unarmed target of Draupadi Mehin. Draupadi Mehin doesn't have any weapon in her hand. She doesn't have standing naked in front of Shenanayak and his men, and that dumbfounds Shenanayak. Shenanayak is completely dumbfounded, we are told, of this unarmed target. So somebody like Shenanayak, who has been carefully maintaining this gap between theory and practice, somebody who has been carefully maintaining sympathy, in theoretical terms, sympathy for these people. In practice, he was supposed to destroy them. That is precisely what he is doing. And despite this possibility of a moral contradiction, despite this possibility of an intellectual contradiction, Shenanayak successfully achieves what he is supposed to do in that particular job that he has been assigned with. Right? That is precisely why they have been able to, catch Draupadi Mehin, and then he orders his men to repeatedly rape her. So he is successful. This is a sovereign subject, a representative of law, who has successfully destroyed his enemy, but only apparently. We are told at the end of the story, much to the contrary of our expectation as readers, most of whom share the same class location as that of Shenanayak, and most of whom who, despite the enormous social inequalities that they practice in their lived realities, talk about equality all the time in theoretical terms. At the end of the story, we are suddenly coming across this unarmed target which completely silences this man uniquely endowed with negative capability, somebody who maintains his Gabertin theory and practice, unlike the gentleman revolutionaries, somebody who has been knowing what he is doing, somebody who is in full control of what he is doing, suddenly finds himself in this sort of disempowered position in front of somebody like Draupadi Mehen, raped, with mangled breast, blood clot in her. Shenanayak is tremendously afraid of that sight of Draupadi Mehen. And this is why I said that it is important for us to focus on certain aspects of the story that are usually not focused upon. For instance, that song. The song represents the non-translatability of their worldviews, perhaps. It is ultimately about some beans, the color of beans. There is nothing dangerous about that song. And yet, so much of effort is made by Shenanayak and his team. They invite scholars to interpret the song, etc. Because they are afraid of it. So we are supposed to perceive Shenanayak, people like Shenanayak, as sovereign subjects, as people who are in full control of what they are doing. And yet, in reality, these are people who are tremendously afraid of a song that is about the color of beans. They are afraid of a raped woman who refuses to be clothed. Therefore, the sovereign subject as a category is questioned invariably in this text. Now, I have reached almost the last part of my lecture. I'll get back to the first note with which I began my lecture, politics of naming. Now, if you look at this last part of the story and think of Mahabharata's Vatsyaharan episode, Draupadi in Mahabharata is getting the help, is taking the help, accepting the help of Krishna, who is providing her with clothes. But in this case, Draupadi Mehen is refusing to be clothed. This is a contradiction. But there is also, even at that moment of resistance, Draupadi Mehen is not entirely giving up on a patriarchal notion of honor or what a man is supposed to be, right? So the sense of honor, sense of shame that is to be associated with her body in an otherwise patriarchal setup is not entirely gone. Just as it is not because of Krishna's intervention in Vatsyaharan episode in the Mahabharata. But at the same time, there is a remarkable, radical point of departure in the sense, in that moment in Mahashweta's story, in the last part of the story, in the sense that she is refusing to be clothed. And by doing that, she is violating the code of honor, the sense of shame with which Shenanayak wanted to shatter her confidence. Right? To be raped is to be ashamed of your body. That was the assumption with which Shenanayak had asked his men to rape her repeatedly. And despite that repeated brutal rape, Draupadi Mehen has come up with this newfound confidence that can dumbfound somebody as confident, as sovereign a subject, as representative of law, as that of the character of Shenanayak. I think I should stop here. Thank you. Anirban?
Yeah.
Subroto?
Thank you, Kalyan.
Thank you.
It is really our privilege to hear your lecture, which is very nuanced, incisive, insightful, almost nearing toward an anti-reading of the text, as we can call it, a kind of peeling out of the interpretative load that has been created by the structural mechanics, or the story has been thrown into that, or the text has been thrown, thwarted into that dynamic, the political social structural dynamic, and this is and most interestingly, the idea of gendered subalternity that has been thrown
Right.
into that space,
Right.
and how it is creating a kind of resistance. And the gendered body, the female body, became a site of contestation and creating a resistance to that dominant hegemonic structure. This is very interesting, very incisive and insightful. Thank you so much. And I was thinking of the final part of the story, that so many things came up in your lectures, so many ideas. Now you were talking about song, which has to be divulged, and the final part of the story, which is very, very interesting, when Draupadi came out in that unguarded moment, unarmed moment, almost to the vulnerable, precarious body, which became a site of resistance
Right.
against the structured, hegemonic, dominant, and very unsettling and disturbing. I was thinking of, if in our experiences of pain can be gogged toward gaining some kind of agency or subjectivity. Pain itself, meaning a kind of, which is very disturbing, troubling, and devastating at the same time, and disrupting too, gaining a kind of agency. That is my question, and I have seen that a considerable number of questions came up in the chat box, which we would put forward. And before that, I would invite our dignitaries to unmute your microphone and put forward your question, comments, reflection on Kalyan's lecture, which is rather brilliant and precise, nuanced, insightful, and what would I call that counter reading of the text in a way. This is really, really brilliant.
Good afternoon, sir. Can I ask?
Yes.
Can I
Sorry,
ask?
who is this? Please introduce yourself.
This is Ishu Saxena from Jodhpur,
Right.
Rajasthan. Sir, could you please
Hi.
elaborate on the concept of negative capability?
Yes, surely. No, I was simply borrowing that phrase in the way it has been introduced and explained by Gayatri Spivak in the preface that she wrote, translator's preface that she wrote to the translation of this particular story. It was published in Critical Inquiry, and there is a PDF that is available on the internet, so you can download it and take a quick look at it. I talked about that negative capability because there is a Keatsian sort of idea of negative capability. We all know that as students of literature. But the crucial part of that definition of negative capability is there are two aspects primarily, and I'm being reductive somewhat. One is this idea that there is a moral confusion, that there is an intellectual confusion that is going on in the creative artist's head, the author's head, if you like, the poet's head, if you like. And at the same time, despite it, or perhaps because that there is this maintenance of this confusion, because there is a gap between the two contrary poles of two different kinds of moral dispensation, let's say, or priorities or concerns. It is because of that, perhaps, that there is a capability that the author is endowed with, which is what Keats would have called a negative capability. His example is Shakespeare, right? But in this case, Shenanayok, and this is an analogical way of putting it, Shenanayok is also somebody who, we are told, feels sympathy for these people who are oppressed, who are trying to, have some protest against, or battle against, or revolution against the local power nexus, local exploitative nexus of power. So there is a sympathy for him. That is one side of the moral pool, if you like. On the contrary, on the other end of the spectrum, as it were, he is also somebody who is, and this is obvious, he is supposed to kill these people. He is somebody who is intellectually interested in knowing these people, their cultures, their languages. The incomprehensible is one instance of that. And the reference to his future project of writing a book about these tribals, wherein he will speak more about the tribal people, more about the Santal people, more about the insurgents, rather than talk about his side of the story. These are all instances that do not allow him to be perceived simply as a normative villain or a negative character in a story. These are aspects of his personality that put us in a puzzle. And the puzzle is that on one hand, he is the man who asks his men to go and rape Draupadi Mehin. He is the one who is supposed to, who has been posted there to destroy these people, destroy insurgent activities, to annihilate these people. And he is the one who is surprisingly interested in these people. Theoretically, he has sympathies for them. And it is because of his careful maintenance of this gap that he gets some kind of a negative capability. It's not just Keats's negative capability, but a kind of negative capability that he gains. But that sort of negative capability, in an ironical sense, is not something that the gentleman revolutionaries, people of his class, but trying their best to undo class affiliation. Gayatri Spivak continuously speaks about this, that undoing one's own class affiliation. Impossible, perhaps, but the efforts are constantly made by gentleman revolutionaries. The gap between theory and practice is constantly done by, is breached by the gentleman revolutionaries, people who are Draupadi Mehin's urban educated comrades, right? But Senanayak is not that kind of a character. Senanayak is somebody who maintains that gap, and it is because of the fact that he can maintain this gap that maintenance of that gap between theory and practice gives him some sort of an agency, some sort of a control over the situation. That is why I kept saying that Senanayak is a character who apparently is in control of everything that is happening, unlike Arjun Singh, who's supposed to be a very determined, courageous, muscular man, epitome of virile, aggressive masculinity that army men are usually perceived as. But that man is suffering from anxiety, that man is suffering from diabetes, and is incapable of taking decisions, unlike Senanayak, who always knows what he is doing, right? But at the end of the story, he is the one who is dumbfounded. His negative capability is gone. It is thwarted by an unarmed target, this raped, naked body of Draupadi Mehin. That is what I was referring to.
Okay, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes. Please introduce yourself.
Yes. Hello, sir. This
Because
is
I can't see
Aranya.
your face. Yeah, Ananya.
This is Aranya Bhattacharya. I'm a research
Yes.
scholar from JU.
Yes, I remember.
Sir, sir, I wanted to know that I was seeing that why Mahashweta Devi specifically uses the adjective black in one particular sentence at the end of the story to refer to the violated body of Draupadi Mehin. We do not come across the factor of race being otherwise mentioned or made latently evident in the text. Then why the color of her body gets mentioned at the end after the rape happens?
Right, right. I think I will take a few more questions and respond to Ananya's question along with those questions.
Okay, sir, I had one more observation. Can I share?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so actually, when you said that there's a difference in the mindset of the middle class intellectuals who were participating in the Naxalbari movement as the Naxals and that of Senanayak, because they were trying the middle class intellectuals who were participating as Naxals, they were trying to bridge the gap between the theory and practice.
Right.
But then when we come across instances of sexual violence within the so-called safe shelter of the underground Naxalbari, underground, how are you going to see this aspect? Because we have come across testimonies of women Naxalites who have actually confessed about being sexually violated within the Naxalbari underground shelters. Then how are you differentiating between the perspectives of Senanayak?
I think I have got it. Got it.
Okay.
I think I have got it. I think that this second question is a good one. I think I'll briefly respond to this before I take other questions, and also make an attempt to answer your first question, which was about racial body, etc. I think, see, Aruna, I don't know whether you have a particular textual reference in mind or some testimonial narrative that you have in your mind when you are asking this question. I'm sure you have some. And I'm also not going to simply dismiss this by saying that these are aberrations or exceptional instances, right? That is the first tendency to with which we respond. But I will say a few things. This is not an anomaly. It is not an anomalous or aberrational or exceptional thing to have happened. There might be some instances like this. And in those instances, I have no hesitation in saying this. The gentlemen revolutionaries, despite their sincere attempts to undo class privilege, to sort of undo their class affiliations, to bridge the gap between theory and practice, in other words, these are moments of failure. These are moments of unfortunate, but certainly these are moments of failure. Failure in what sense? Not in a moral sense, but in the sense that they fail to undo their class privileges. They fail to bridge the gap between theory and practice. But that is not to simply suggest that there isn't any effort that is made by them, or at least some of them, a few of them, right? So I was primarily talking about those efforts. Spivak is primarily referring to those efforts. There are efforts. These are deliberate epistemological efforts, intellectual efforts, through which they try and undo their class privileges, despite the fact that they belong to the same class as Shenanayak. But Shenanayak's project is a different one. Whether they execute the project in an effective way is a different question. But there is a project. The project for gentlemen revolutionaries is to bridge the gap between theory and practice. But for Shenanayak, it is important, absolutely central to his project, to maintain the gap. Otherwise, he wouldn't get this sort of Keatsian negative capability with which his sovereign subjecthood is asserted, right? Is articulated, is stressed. But that sovereign subjecthood is also questioned. At the end of this story, as Anirban was suggesting, this phenomenology of pain, as it were, endows Draupadi Mehen. It becomes an enabling factor rather than becoming a disabling factor, because that is what he had anticipated, that it will be a disabling factor. It will, cripple her. It will destroy her. Make her do the needful. That is the statement, right, made by Shenanayak. That doesn't happen. Contrarily, we come across a situation wherein he is the one who is afraid of Draupadi Mehen. Right? So that is what I, was thinking when I was talking about this. Any other questions?
Shivendu Chakraborty.
Oh, Shivendu.
Yeah.
Hello.
You have a question. Can you please put forward it in a clear way? He was talking about scopic gauge.
Thank you. Thank you for a very interesting deliberation. I think
Thank
I'm
you,
audible.
Thank you, Shivendu. You are audible. You are audible.
Yeah. The thing is that I'm a bit curious about the thing. I was somehow sort of comparing between the last scene of Amiri Baraka's The Dutchman with a very sort of concluding part of the narrative, and sort of just like the black man over there was trying to sort of give something back in response to the kind of scopic gaze that the white woman did sort of ascribe on him, and in the process he got killed. Similarly, this kind of nullification of the paradigmatic endowment of the hegemonic gaze in terms of somebody who is in power somehow gets negated or cancelled by means of this Draupadi's very bold, metaphorically significant stance of unrobing herself, or sort of denying to get herself robed. And I think here lies this kind of reversal paradigm of a scopic gaze, that responses somebody who is in power and tries to establish his or her agency by writing back in her own way of redressal. This is
Thank
just
you,
an observation.
Yeah, thank you.
Sort of-
I kind of agree with what you were saying. I think, I'll very quickly respond to it. I think one of the significant parts that I did not elaborately discuss, a significant part of this interpretation of the story that I did not discuss at length is the idea of the gendered subaltern.
Yes.
I did not do it because that would have taken me to Can the Subaltern Speak? That would have taken me to, the menstruating body of the, woman who had committed suicide in Spivak's, autobiographical, but we get to know about that it is autobiographical only later. That kind of essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? That would have probably also taken me back to Ranajit Guha's idea of the subaltern consciousness, etc., and how that can be retrieved, the idea of representation, Vastalung, Vastalen, etc. So I didn't get into that today. If there is another lecture that anyone wants me to deliver on Draupadi, I would love to talk about the idea of the gendered subaltern. But one of the things that your observation rather, provokes me to think of and also articulate is that the moment of silent refusal to be robed, not so silent, but she refuses to be robed, and that act, if you think of it in very common way, the usual normative ways of scopic gaze that you talked about, then you would simply say that she has been already raped, so the damage has been done to her. And there is no point in simply considering this sort of act of not robing herself again, and the Shenanayak's dumbfounded status. These don't mean much. In fact, I have had some students in some previous years at presidency who said, "Kedi, this lady has been already raped, so the damage has been done. What resistance are we talking about?" There is a moment of silence, there is a moment of being dumbfounded on the part of Shenanayak, but we don't know after the story. Perhaps if the narrative can be perceived as continued from that point, probably she is again raped or she is just killed, right? So the question of resistance, where is the question of resistance? Now, these are people who are missing the message of the story. One of the crucial messages that we get from Can the Subaltern Speak by Spivak is the way this lady was trying to communicate a message that people did not understand. What was the message? She waited for her menstruation. Bhuvaneshwari Devi. She waited for her menstruation to start. Why? Because otherwise people would have understood it as an act of committing suicide due to shame. Probably she had become pregnant, and that is why she killed herself. And that was quite a common phenomenon at that time. Many widows would have become pregnant and they would have killed themselves, and that was a common practice in that sense. And this lady did not want to do that, did not want to let that message go out in the public domain. She waited for the menstruation cycle to begin, and then she committed suicide because she apparently failed to execute some nationalist job that she was assigned to perform. Here also, and that was the message. So the subaltern, is talking, but it is not received as a speech. There is an incongruity, and here also at the end of the story, Mahashweta's story, Draupadi Mehin is actually talking, but that is just talking. Probably a lot of readers would not even recognize it as a speech of protest, as something that is resisting this sort of scopic gaze that you described as some kind of an hegemonic gaze. The reference to gaze also reminds us of Lacan. The moment he is dumbfounded, Shenanayak is dumbfounded, it is as if there is an invasion of real. As we know from Lacanian psychoanalysis, after the moment of invasion of the real, the symbolic order is sort of disrupted, and so on. So probably I'm not a Lacanian psychoanalyst, and I might be wrong. There are better people with a far better knowledge than I do. I have on Lacanian psychoanalysis, and they probably can attempt some kind of a reading of the gaze from a Lacanian psychoanalytical perspective. But this is just a quick sort of response to what you said.
Thank you. Thank you so
Oliver.
much. Thank you.
Yeah. Hello.
Yes, Professor Das, it has been such a brilliant, deliberation. I would say an accurate autopsy of the entire story. Though you promise that you will limit yourself within the concerns of the students' benefits, but I don't think you have so successfully done it, because you have come out to reflect some of the very critical issues which would be very challenging for us to think about, because some of the ideas that you have talked about are so, thought-provoking, Like I would say, what Spivak has said, that the subaltern community can be represented, but they cannot be represented. You can represent them, but you can represent them. The problem is there. And then how body becomes an agency. Body is something that is to be taken to be ashamed of. Women, a woman who gets raped, or violated, it becomes a subject of objectification. But how body emerges out to be an agency to defy the socio-political structures, patriarchal structures, or political structures around her. So these things are have been, in such a brilliant way, have, I would say, vivisected, that it has been so outstanding and penetrating one, And some of the other issues, like, I would say the gendered subaltern that you have touched about, some areas, a conflict between romanticized version of urban Naxalite movement and the practical predicaments of it, These things have been so brilliantly dealt throughout the journey with your speech, And
Thank you.
so, yes, it's been absolutely enlightening one, not only for the students, but also other educators, teachers joining us from all across the country, So I think one question is coming up for you. So Ruchi Singhal. Yes, please go ahead with the question.
Shubhato, I think I'll probably have 5 more minutes to,
Okay.
have, I will have to attend another meeting at 4:30. So it will be better if I just take 1 or 2 more questions, and then I'll have to sign off, unfortunately.
Okay, somebody from Assam University is asking a question. Please go ahead with the question.
Please go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah.
I'm Shushmita Das from Shantipur College. My question is Draupadi Mahan making a clash between the mythical world and the hard reality through the rejection of her garments?
Sorry, could you repeat your question? I didn't get it.
Is Draupadi Mahan making a clash between the mythical world and the hard reality through the rejection of garments?
Well, Shushmita, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by this question, but I think Draupadi Mahan is refusing to be clothed as an act of protest, yes, but I'm not sure whether it is a take. It is also a kind of inadvertent take, if you like, on some kind of a mythical world or whatever you spoke about. But if you think of Draupadi, then yes, Draupadi's character is somebody who allowed herself to be robed by Krishna, and Draupadi Mahan is not, letting either her comrades, gentlemen revolutionaries, or her Adivasi comrades to come and rescue her, to protect her, to give her some clothes. And at the same time, she's not somebody who is ready to get robed again. She says, I will continue to be naked, stand in front of you people. So there is certainly a challenge to that sort of mythical narrative of clothing and robing and disrobing that we are familiar with through Mahabharata. But otherwise, I don't think I can completely comprehend your question and answer to it accordingly. But thank you.
Thank you, sir. Hello.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes,
sir.
who is
I'm
this?
Kaushik Banerjee from Purulia.
Oh, hi.
Yes, sir.
Hi,
Sir,
Kumar.
yes, sir. I have a question, so, sir. That what is means you have heard that this the behind the bodies. They're open saying that there is a rape of the people. So I am also saying that this in this story, the Draupadi, there is a rape of the people because the authority or the
Acha.
government is dispossessing them because by uprooting them or displacing them from their land. If
No,
rape
Kaushik,
is
I
disrobing,
think, Kaushik, I get your, get the sense in which you are speaking, but I
yes,
think I have some discomfort with the way you are equating dispossession with rape. I get your point, but
yes.
yeah. So go on. Yes.
Yes, sir. This is not even the Upin has said this in the behind the bodies. He said that there is a rape of the people in the behind the bodies story. So I think here
Yes,
is
in the
also the rape
sense.
of the people because the government is disrobing them, even uprooting them from their land. And I
Right.
think it is a rape of the people. And my observation is
Okay.
that if
Okay.
government needed to just launch an army, deploy in the forest. I think the rule of a university that police cannot enter a university. I think there should be a rule that police cannot
Similar
enter a
rule.
jungle, and if they enter, be a rule that police cannot
Similar
enter a
rule.
jungle, and if they entered, at least there's once means one person should be there to just surveillance them, to just surveil them, to just to entirely look to given the charge of that person, to given that charge of that person because
No,
they are yes yes
I
yes you
get
may
your
continue. Yes.
point. I get your observation, but I'm not at this point. I'm not too sure how exactly you want to execute that plan, or how whether I can sort of agree with it. I'm not too sure about that. But anyway, thank you for your observations.
Excuse me, sir. Hello.
It would,
Yes.
Sir,
I
I'm
think,
Devi from
can you
Shantipur.
please?
Shubhrato, can this be the last question that we
Yes,
receive?
yes. Let it be the
Yes,
last
yes.
question.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
understand.
yeah,
It must
This
be
is
the
the
last
last
question.
one.
Sir, my
yeah.
question is, why did Canada command make
Nirvan, go on.
yes, sir, do the needful? Instead of that, he could directly command to rape her. Then why did he command that?
Sorry, can you repeat your question? I didn't get it.
Not clear. Yes, make
Why
it
did
clear.
Canada command to make her or do the needful? Instead of that, he could directly command to rape her. Then why did
Right.
he command?
No,
Is there
I think
anything
from
else?
that, yes, from
Negative
that,
capability
thank
counts.
you, Nirvan. From that statement, yes, it is tied to that concern of mine and Spivak of negative capability, concern with that idea of negative capability that we are talking about. But I'll not get into negative capability again because then someone else will say I'm repeating myself. I think it is better for me to quickly respond to Nirvan's question. Um, Nirvan, I think that statement, at a very general sort of level, that statement is actually indicative of the fact that he wants to maintain that gap between theory practice, one. And secondly, he is asking them to make her do the needful. It is a direct reference to how he thinks that rape will destroy her moral stamina, her courage, her sense of integrity, her determination to get involved with the insurgent activities, etc. So, do the needful is a reference to that. So, it's not just a question of rape. Rape is not just this bodily act of violence. It is also about disempowering Draupadi. So, when he says, go and do this, do the needful, make her is a reference to this sort of, remaking that he expects, that Draupadi, after being brutally raped repeatedly, will be a different kind of Draupadi Mehe. Not the earlier Draupadi Mehe with confidence and determination and so on, but a crumpled, crippled, distorted sort of Draupadi Mehe who will have lost her confidence. But that doesn't happen. So this statement is actually, made to look very ironical at the later stage when we encounter the last part of the story.
Well,
Sir,
actually, I
can you,
think,
sir, hello,
yeah,
sir.
I think we
Yeah, can
can't
we have
afford to
those
take more questions.
questions? Can we have those questions later? If they are interested, they can directly send these questions to me. I'm available through Facebook and Gmail. You can send your questions to me directly. I'll be happy to answer them.
That's a great opportunity. Absolutely great opportunity for the students.
Yes,
So it is
there
so
are a lot
difficult.
of
It would have
questions.
been better.
Considerable number of questions are there on the
Right.
YouTube channel, so we can send you to them. Send you them to
Yeah.
Absolutely.
your email.
It, actually, but it would have been brilliant had you been able to continue further. But
Yeah, I would have
we have
loved
to
to, but
honor
I
the
have to. I
commitments.
have to leave. Yeah.
I understand the constraints. We have to follow because we have got some other commitments also
Yeah.
that must be respected as
Exactly.
well.
Yeah.
So it has been an absolute pleasure. I mean, I would say a rewarding experience. Whenever you listen you talking, on any particular topic, it always becomes a rewarding experience, and it has exactly been so this time also. So we don't know how to express our gratitude for this such a brilliant presentation. It has been so enlightening, so refreshing, so penetrating, I would say. Students must be motivated to go to the text again and again and get, I'd say, critically enlightened by the ideas dealt in this such a short but very compact story. And one thing I must say that our principal ma'am, Dr. Chandrima Bhattacharya, she has been all the way right from the beginning of your lecture, and listening to you with rapt attention, and she had
Oh,
expressed
that's
her
nice of her.
gratitude, thankfulness that
I'm grateful to
it
her.
has been a brilliant experience for her as well. She conveys her heartfelt gratitude and sincere in regards for you as well. She has been
Thank you.
absolutely captivated, I would say, by your speech. As she
Oh,
conveys it
I'm
to
so
us.
glad to know
And
that.
and with this note of positivity, that we'll be again getting the opportunity to listen to you, sir, because it has been so rewarding, so brilliantly articulated speech, as it has always been everywhere, wherever I have heard you, So hopefully tomorrow also, someday, we'll be able to rope you in such,
Yeah,
such,
absolutely.
other
I would love
activities,
to.
academic activities,
I would love to.
And
Yes.
thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
everybody,
Thanks to the entire
for being
department
with
of
us all
yours.
the way.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so much. Thank you.
you.